Hello, my name is Jonathan Demege, and I'm going to present some of the findings of my PhD thesis on the political ecology of road construction in Ladakh, which I presented at the Institute of Development Studies 3 years ago. So to start with, and just to situate Ladakh, Ladakh is situated in North India, in the region of Jammu Kashmir, and it's north of the Himalayas. It's a pretty big district in terms of area, of size, and it's clustered between Pakistan and China, or Autonomous Tibet. It's a pretty contested region as well. It has been several border wars, and this is linked to road construction actually, because a lot of roads there are built for geopolitical reasons. So what did I look at? I looked at road construction through political ecology framework, which means that I'm interested in the way people perceive, use, and transform the environment through socio-political arrangements and for purposes that are socially and culturally mediated. And I look at the way the environment and environmental transformation shape, enable, and influence society. So it goes both ways. When we think about environmental consequences of roads, we think about deforestation, for instance. This is a road in Peru, and as you can see, the road was built and basically was used to exploit the forest and deforest and so on. And now it's clearly visible if you look at the view from the sky, like this one. Or we think also about landslides, and that is a picture taken in Nepal, where a lot of non-engineered road building takes place. So people come together. I mean, it's decided at the local government level. They hire bulldozer and they come and carve the road. And what happens usually is that after one monsoon you have a lot of landslide, and after 2 or 3 monsoons the road is just unusable. So there's a whole political economy behind that to explain why this is taking place. But the environmental effects are also broader than this, and are really linked to livelihoods. That's something I'm going to show in this presentation. It's something that I show in my thesis. So what I did is that I look at the politics of road construction. I look at both road and road construction together to see what also the impacts of these two effects were. And I looked also at how the politics of road construction were also linked to the consequences. So I tried to look at all these socio-economic environmental consequences and at livelihoods. I did that for both local populations and migrant road workers, because both were implied in road and road construction. And I did that at different moments in time. I did it before the road was built, during road construction, and after road construction, to see what the different transformations were, when they were taking place, and how they were taking place. Just to situate a little bit more the study, these are the different sites where I did some research. So it's a pretty multi-sited one could say itinerant ethnography. So there was a lot of, when I could, I traveled by road, but a lot of walking also, because I went to many places that didn't have a road, to see what life was like before road, what mobility was like, and why people wanted a road, what they expected from it. In terms of methods, I use participant observation, focus group discussions, semi-structured and in-depth interviews. I use a lot of life histories, well-being graphs, and cyclical calendars. I organize some participatory field inquiries, including daily and yearly activity profiles, food matrices, institution and movement maps, road maps, and we even reenacted road negotiations through drama. I use GIS, photography, and a small quantitative survey. And I did a little bit of statistical analysis as well. So what is mobility like in the absence of road? Well, people just walk. They walk and they carry material with donkeys or horses. So this is a 5,000 meters pass on the way to the village where people were expecting the road for more than decades. So at that time when I conducted the fieldwork, this village was 3-day walk away from the road. Now, apparently the road has reached the village. I also looked at the way, how the landscape shapes road construction, road and transformation through road building. For instance, in that case, what you see here is a mani wall. It's a wall of prayers. It's a religious monument. So it's part of a religious landscape. And when the engineers built the road, well, they had no choice but to cut through that wall, and that was very, very criticized because you don't cut a religious monument. But what is interesting is that this religious monument actually was there because there was a way, because there was a train next to it. People were passing along that wall. They built that wall there because people were passing there. So you have also, you have on the one hand, you have these contested landscapes and different conception of the landscape and how the environment should be transformed or should be used. But at the same time, you have also this, this kind of discursive relation, or dialectical relationship between the landscape and movement, and how the landscape shapes movement and how the movement shapes the landscape. And now let's talk about that road. So this is the village of Linkshed, this village 3-day walk away from the road that I mentioned before. So at some point, 5 or 6 years ago, the village got some fund and decided to build a road there. So they built a 4 kilometers portion of road that is absolutely unconnected. So it's still 3-day walk away from the road, but you have this small portion of road that was built on one side of the village. On that place, you have very few houses. It's very steep. Probably that road will never be used. If you look a little bit closer, that's what it looks like. You see that it's interrupted in many places. There are boulders, there are fields, there are forests, there's a nunnery. So everywhere there is something that matters to the people, the road stops. So obviously, if you try to read the landscape, you see that there is a lot of contestation between these roads. So I tried to know what the story was and interviewed the people. The other thing, if you ask engineers how they decide about the trajectory of the road, they tell you, well, we build it according to the willingness of the people. So I wanted to know what the willingness of the people meant. So what I did is that I distributed a map to the people. I took a picture from the highest pass above the village. And the next time I went there, I copied 20 of them and I distributed them to them with a colored pen and asked them how they would like the road to be built, the road to the village. And out of 20 people, I got 20 different maps. The whole area of the village was colored with different road trajectories. So basically, this is the willingness of the people. So it's a pretty difficult job for an engineer to find, out of that, to carve one road, to decide about one trajectory. So I found that they use different techniques to avoid confrontation. They go there when the people are away, or what they do is that they ask all the villagers to come. They say, now we have a problem, we have some oppositions, we can't build the roads, we let you decide, and 1 month later they come back and the villagers have agreed on something. But basically, there is some opposition, but the opposition is silent. So although there are laws there that will enable them to just take the land in the name of public interest, they don't use them. They negotiate through village institutions. So why is there so much opposition, so much contestation when a road is built? Well, when a road is built, you have a lot of transformation happening. The land next to the road, for instance, takes value. This picture was taken, it's in the middle of a desert in Ladakh. And what's happening, this place has no water, so the land has no value. If there's no water, you can't cultivate anything. But because you build a road there, the land takes some value. So people build these small houses, which have only one door and one window, which are about 1.50 meters per 1.50 meters wide, just to keep the land. Because since there is a road, then this road takes value, and maybe someday they can build a shop or do something else. At the same time, road construction, especially if the valley is narrow, provokes a lot of destruction. And so it provokes landslides, it takes the land, and people depend on the land. These are subsistent peasants, subsistent farmers, and if there is no land, if they have no trees, then they don't produce any food. So they lose their livelihood. So that's why people usually don't want the road to pass on their field, but rather on the neighbor's field. So what happens now for road migrants? Well, these roads are also built to generate employment. So a lot of migrants come and work on these roads. But what I found out is actually that migrants don't benefit very much from this. Of course, they earn an income, but life is so expensive there, and they have so many costs, and the task is so dangerous that actually there are a lot of factors that play against them, a lot of structural factors. And in the end, I didn't find any or very few workers who actually benefited from road construction. Let's come back to villagers now. So this is an example of a life history in a small village in Ladakh. So what happened when the road was built is that this person benefited a lot. And the people who benefited the most from the road were people who benefited both from the road construction and from the road itself, from the effects of the road itself, and the new opportunities that it opened in terms of livelihoods. So for instance, this person worked on the road as a coolie for the public work department, and then he got a permanent job with the public work department. He was in charge of road maintenance. So he had a stable income for more than 30 years. At the same time, he also had some land next to the road. He was able to do some business, sell some medicine. He was able to cultivate, grow trees. Thanks to the road, he could export his trees, sell the trees outside of the village. At some point, he became richer, bought a truck, which he could also use on the road. And then he bought a taxi and a tractor, and his children worked with his taxi and his tractor, and so on. So, and this person became the richest man of the village. He was in charge of road maintenance and became the richest man of the village. That is another case. This person, MetaMeta, was mate for the public work department. So he was the one managing the labor. He was very influential. And when the engineers came to design the road, MetaMeta managed to impose what he wanted to be the trajectory of the road, and even had a fight at some point to impose his will. So he had a lot of land, but he managed to have the road built just next to his land. Not on his land, because otherwise he would have lost his land, but just next to it. In the end, he opened more than 22 shops that he rented to barber, to different shops, to restaurants, to a bank, and in his village, he became also the richest man in the village. So if we look at the different activities, different livelihoods, actually a lot of livelihoods are either enabled by the road. For instance, of course, you can only have a truck and rent a truck if there is a road. Same for exporting trees, for instance. But a lot of occupation are also transformed by the road. Of course, if you have a shop or a guest house, you have more customers if there is a road next to it. If you are a coppersmith, for instance, you don't have to go to the city to sell the things you can carry, but people now come to your village and buy directly from you. So there were also a lot of transformation on what the people produced and so on for the road. So I tried to take all this into consideration and see if there was also if the edge of the road had an impact on how wealthy people were. And actually I did find that by doing some statistical correlation, that the oldest the road was, and normally the wealthiest the people were. So there was clearly a link between the age of the road and how wealthy they were. I looked also at food consumption and mode of acquisition. So in this village, for instance, we see that there was some transformation in the food that was produced, because now they started to produce for the market. At the same time, there were also a lot of food that was still produced for self-consumption. So things changed, but a lot of things remain the same as well. And if you compare this situation, this village, with a village that is away from the road, you see that the proportion of home that is bought and the proportion and the food that is cultivated is not so different. Another thing that remains slightly changed is the seasonality of well-being. So for people, there are different things that compose their well-being that are important for them, for their conditions, material conditions, or how they feel. And for instance, income or food availability, of climate, or workload. So these things tend to be very seasonal in Ladakh and very much linked to the climate actually. But the thing is that with road, once the roads are built, they remain seasonal because access by road is also seasonal. If you look at mobility of the people, and I think maybe that was one of the most interesting findings of the thesis, is that if you look at a village like Lingshed that is 3-day walk away from the road, you would expect people to be not very mobile. Well, actually, people are extremely mobile. They visit a lot of different locations during the year. They have different ways according to the season to get there. Spend a lot of time commuting, of course, because it takes time to travel by foot. But they also do travel a lot and visit a lot of locations. Whereas if you look at a village that is on the road, as in Alchi, we discover that the map of movement is much more simple. Basically, people tend to visit only locations that are on the road and mainly go to the administrative center and to the market. And if you ask them about how they lived mobility, how the mobility was 30 years ago, they will mention all these different places where they used to go, but they don't go anymore. So the effect of the road is pretty much to canalize movement along the road, and areas that are not on the road are not visited anymore. And this is pretty much linked to the livelihoods. Because people, if you look at the map of movement in Lingshed, a lot of these locations are linked to livelihoods. They go there to gather wood. They go there to graze the yaks or donkeys or goats, often different locations. They go there to trade the butter. But once there is a road that is built, the main places they visit are the market and the administrative center. But a lot of resources that they used to go and collect in the area around, like fuel wood, for instance, they don't need to do it anymore because gas cylinders come to the village. So you would expect roads to increase people's mobility, but actually they decrease mobility's needs, and therefore they decrease mobility. And the other thing is that mobility tends to be also very much gendered. So this is the map of movement for women. And on average, women are about 4 times less mobile than men, because mobility is linked to the need for mobility, but it's also linked to cultural norms and what people are expected to do and can do. So I would like to finish with four conclusions. The first one is that road construction in Ladakh has been driven by many different and changing set of priorities and policies, from resource extraction to administration and nation building, agricultural production, employment generation, socio-economic development, and security. And this all explain the historical development of the road network. One fact that is interesting is that roads are still built in the name of development, although the connection remains debated, and the state's motivation seem more linked to political and strategic consideration. Second, road construction tends to be an erratic process that depends for its advancement on the active involvement of people at the local level. Roads micropolitics can be divided into 2 distinct phases or stages. During the first stage, people collectively fight to have a road to build to the village. They mobilize material and discursive resources. They lobby officials, representatives, and contractors. And they closely monitor the progress of and threats to the construction of the road. The second stage of road politics concerns the trajectory of the road within the village. Roads bring benefit to villages, but they also destroy existing resources and assets. The gains and losses that occur because of the road are unequally distributed and depend on its trajectory. As a consequence, road negotiations tend to be divisive. And the outcomes of negotiations run the risk of reinforcing power relations and harming vulnerable households. The third conclusion is about migrant workers. Whereas one of the alleged purposes of road construction is to provide employment, generate livelihoods, and alleviate poverty, evidence shows that migrant workers see no or no marginal improvements in their well-being. The reason for this, I argue, is that the agency is constrained by exploitative conditions and structural factors that in many cases prevent them from benefiting from the redistributive effects of road construction. And finally, The consequences of roads are complex and often contradictory. They affect people in different ways and are difficult to evaluate. Transformation linked to the road happen within a continuum of change, often in combination with other factors, and can be resisted so that the progression is not linear. Roads are better understood as facilitators than initiators of change, as they affect the magnitude and rapidity of transformations. Where the road appears to have significant consequences in terms of livelihoods, as the road creates new livelihood opportunities and transforms existing ones, notably in construction and maintenance. But the road is not the only factor responsible for improving livelihoods and well-being. And as I try to highlight in this presentation, one of the most paradoxical effects of roads concerns isolation and mobility, as roads facilitate mobility and transport. But in Ladakh, they do not increase mobility. On the contrary, they decrease it. This has to do with the way in which the road works, through complex interactions, interplays, and adjustments. And as mobility needs are redefined by consumption, production patterns, and new economic activities, the road decreases mobility needs and canalizes movement along a few main axes. So I tried to summarize a bit the conclusions, and of course I explained this in more details in my thesis. Thank you very much.